The Empress returns, by Iowa Forever. 2.01 Plots and Prophecy. Magnus withdraws his power. Afflicting the Psyker with portents of doom is child's play, but lingering for too long risks drawing the attention of the Emperor and perhaps unraveling the intricate works behind the Imperium's crusade. So Lorgar says. Magnus' doubt has not lessened. The Primarch of the Thousand Suns drifts back through the warp, returning to the crone world of the Eldar once more. There is a pause before he steps back through the portal to real space, Lorgar's attendants awaiting him as the Primarch of the Word-Bearers meditated. Your message has been sent, Magnus said. Though such manipulations make me wonder why you've turned me into a glorified errand boy. Only the greatest of Psykers could hope to do this without risk of discovery, Magnus. Lorgar replied, still not rising to face Magnus. Truly, I thank you for your contributions. When all is said and done, your reward shall be far beyond even the shining halls of Prospero. Magnus said nothing, watching as Lorgar finished his incantation and rose to face him. The 10th gate rests within the path of the Great Devourer and the Emperor. When both have been fully committed, I shall advance the next stage of my plan. And conducting a demonic ritual beneath the Emperor's nose is less likely to attract her attention? Magnus asked. From a limited perspective of the warp, yes. Lorgar countered, giving Magnus an unpleasant smile. Or did you think my discussion with you all those months ago meant nothing? But coming from one that understands nothing of subtlety, you miss your true opportunity. Both Magnus and Lorgar turned as a new figure approached. He was just barely taller than a regular Astartes, clad in blue and green armor untainted by the effects of the warp. I thought I told you to leave, Lorgar snapped, turning to face the newcomer. I have no desire for your petty games, Alfarius. You say that, but I know well enough that there is more than just the power of the warp that you seek. Alfarius replied, circling the two other Primarchs as he continued. Even with the knowledge you have, the Emperor is not a target you can easily assail. There is a spark that follows after her, drawn by her knowledge of power. Ignore the spark, and it will consume all that you have planned. Magnus raised an eyebrow at this, but said nothing as Lorgar continued. There is nothing that I have not anticipated, Lorgar said. The Tyranids, the Orcs, the forces of our brothers, all has moved to where I have commanded it to be. You would squander such intricate plans for what, a minor victory followed by crushing defeat? You misinterpret my intentions, Lorgar. Alfarius countered. I come not to critique your strategy, but to offer knowledge of tools you may have forgotten. What sort of tools? Magnus asked. Well, it is good to see one among us still listens. The Primarch of the Alpha Legion pulled something from the shadows, flipping it open to reveal a holographic display. Deep within the bowels of the Grand Collection lies a blade of great power, one that can strike even the greatest of man with a fatal blow. An anatheme blade? Magnus asked. I had thought they were destroyed during the heresy. Most were, but one survived. Alfarius looked to Lorgar. You know the one I speak of. The one your minion stole to smite Horus and start the Long War. That blade was lost when Fulgrim ascended to demonhood. Lorgar scoffed. You bore me with discussions on weapons that are of no use to anyone but remembrancers and codicils. Did Fulgrim tell you it was destroyed? There was a pause before Alfarius withdrew the display. The anatheme is very much intact, waiting in the halls of Azena's lord for its master to recover it. I know where it is, and I will bring it to you for your war against the Imperium. And what do you wish in return? Lorgar asked. No one would be so willing to hand over such a powerful weapon without something to gain from it. Do we truly live in an age where a simple gift must come with a catch? Alfarius asked. But as it stands, the vaults where the anatheme are located are rather heavily guarded. I will need some assistance in holding off those forces while I steal the sword. A few hundred legionnaires should be more than enough to compensate for such power, no? Your own operatives are not enough? Lorgar scoffed again. What do I care? Take what you need and get out of my sight, and do not return until you have the blade. In time, brother. With that the other Primarch began to fade into the darkness. Or were your speeches on patience merely for our benefit and not yours? Magnus watched Alfarius depart, but even with his powers he could not see the Alpha Legion Primarch slip away completely. Knowing Alfarius, he is equally likely to name you to the blade and kill you as he is to give it to you, Magnus said, looking to Lorgar. Bah! Alfarius' little schemes never come to anything more than a costly annoyance, Lorgar said. If he produces the anatheme, then we have a potent weapon in our grasp. If he does not, he removes himself from my presence and allows us time to truly plan. See to it that your confidence does not become your undoing, Lorgar, Magnus said, turning to leave Lorgar. Leaving so soon, brother? Lorgar asked. I had thought you would like to stay and witness my grand demonstration firsthand. I have other matters to attend to, Magnus said as he opened another warp portal. When your demonstration is complete, then perhaps there will be more to discuss. With that, Magnus stepped back into the warp, not stopping as the swirling tides close in around him. His journey takes him back across the galaxy, searching once more for the fleet preparing for transit within the southern reaches of the Imperium. Finding the light is not difficult. The Emperor's presence shines like a beacon, blinding even among the darkness and currents of the warp. Magnus pays it no mind, drifting beneath its currents as he searches for the spark of Alfarius' musings. He finds the psyker he had afflicted. She has been moved to a different ship, away from the Empress but still too close for the Primarch to approach undetected. For what it was worth, as his glimpses into the young woman's mind revealed nothing of interest. A useful tool, perhaps, but no real threat. It is the woman watching over her that catches Magnus' attention. She is a young woman, shorter and clad in lavender armor radiating with psychic energy. A short probe brushes against the edges of her psychic perception, Magnus furrowing his brow as he examines the woman. She is powerful, perceptive even, but still just a mortal in the eyes of the gods. And yet there is an air around her, a hidden aura that drifts even beyond Magnus' sight. He probes closer, brushing ever so gently against the girl's power, but the source of the aura remains muddied. What is it that makes you so important? Magnus asks. You are a child in the eyes of the Emperor, what difference do you matter? The girl would not respond, but Magnus does not need her answer, not yet. Instead he watches, and waits. Angelique had been transferred back to the Sanguinium Martyrs, so Bianca could better sedate her until the visions ceased. Terra had accompanied them, hovering over the young psyker as the Hospitaller and her new understudy worked. She had even offered to use some of her own powers to calm Angelique, reasoning that a more powerful and learned psyker might be enough to cut through the visions and clear her mind. Matthias had been tempted to agree to the plan, but decided against it. The last thing he needed was for Terra to get pulled into Angelique's visions. You must be willing to trust Terra with her powers, the Empress said when Matthias had explained during his debrief. She has come a long way since our first encounters on Caesarea. I'm sure she has, but with all due respect to both you and Terra, I would like to conduct such tests in a more controlled environment. Matthias replied. Visions of Tyranid attacks tend to be a bit more contagious than others, and drawing Terra in might not be the best for her sanity. You underestimate her power, but I understand your concern. The Empress nodded. Even over the comm screen Matthias could tell there was more she was not saying, but he did not wish to press further. Is there any more information that you gleaned from Angelique? Yes, actually. Matthias shifted before continuing. One of her ramblings before the sedatives took control was of the Sons of the Drake. Given Cetus' size and projected path of attack on the galaxy, my guess is that she is referring to a strike against Nocturne. Nocturne? The Empress asked. I have seen star maps, and while the Hive fleet is large, it is not so large to attack that deep into our territory. Cetus is an anomaly, Matthias said. It's moving faster and more erratically than we anticipated, and tends to skim smaller targets before going for the main threat. If it can trick us into sacrificing Agrax's defenses and then string us along with an attack that never comes, it can certainly mount a strike on Nocturne. There was a pause before Matthias began to fidget. At least, that is my personal opinion on the matter. I am always open to a new perspective on these matters. Remember, I never fought the Tyranids during the Great Crusade, so any information on our enemy is welcome. The Empress gave a nod before continuing. Very well. We will move the fleet to Nocturne, then perhaps the exact point of Cetus' focus will become apparent. It is a bit further north than I would like, but all plans can be modified when the time comes. Understood, Empress. Matthias replied. Would you like me to return Terra to your ship? Actually, I think it would be best if Terra remain aboard the Sanguinium Martyrs with you, at least until we reach Nocturne. The Empress gave a smile. I am seeking to improve her ability at warp communication, in the event that more adverse circumstances draw us apart as they did on Caesarea. The distance along with our warp transit should be a good test of her abilities. I see. Matthias shifted again. Wouldn't that become more difficult the closer we draw to the Tyranids? The shadow in the warp is something I have considered, yes. But I am sure that with my powers we should have no issue in communicating. As you say. The Empress nodded again before continuing. The fleet will be ready for transit in several minutes, once the rest of our reinforcements are assembled and Terra's bodyguards are reunited. Alert me if any new developments occur. And with that the Empress departed, leaving Matthias alone in the communication room. He allowed some of the tension within him to subside, palming his forehead as he contemplated their next move. Tyranids. Not the worst threat they could be facing, but perhaps one Matthias had hoped would come much later, preferably with the Empress at the head of an army magnitudes larger than what they had now. But manifesting such armies was beyond the capabilities of an inquisitor of his rank, so he had to make do with what he had. "Patch me through to the nearest supply depot, access level Dominus," he said, flipping through several switches while others within the communication room did much the same. There was a pause before the silver eye of the Ordo Xenos flashed across the screen, followed soon by an older fellow in matching robes. "We are at your service, my lord," the man said. "I am taking my ship into Tyranid-infested space soon," Matthias said. "I will need supplies ready and waiting at Nocturne for my arrival." "Of course, my lord." The man nodded as further information was transmitted. "Dominator class base with inquisitorial modifications, designation Sanguinium Martyrs. What weapons will you be requiring, my lord?" "Additional virus and Phosphex torpedoes will suffice." Matthias paused, massaging his chin for a moment before speaking again. Psych-out torpedoes would be welcome as well. But almost all psych-out weaponry was either used up just before the Emperor's ascension or is held by the Ordo Malleus. The man replied. "I cannot say for certain if we can deliver any." "I am under the Empress' direct command," Matthias snapped. "As representative of the Inquisition under her name, my word trumps all but hers. If you know of the torpedoes, you get me those torpedoes. I'm sure the Ordo Malleus wouldn't mind a few released if it means the Empress is not killed by some insect." As you say, my lord." The man nodded sheepishly. "I will make the necessary arrangements. The weapons you requested will be on Nocturne when you arrive." "Current transit time to Nocturne is 2 months from my position," Matthias said. "They better be there, or I will be the least of your concerns." With that the image winked out, Matthias staring at the spot as if daring the man to return with a rejection. He stood there long enough to see a familiar figure behind him. "Matthias?" Hera asked, causing him to turn around. "I was wondering if you wanted to check on Angelique. She's still sedated, but it never hurts to at least visit and show you care." "That's," Matthias started. "I will probably visit when she's awake again, to make sure she's back to normal." This seemed to dishearten Tara, but she nodded all the same. "I understand, I guess," she replied. "Are you doing all right? We've been in such a rush since all this has happened. I was starting to worry that maybe things were getting out of hand." "It's nothing I haven't dealt with before, Tara," Matthias said, moving past her and into the hallway. "Angelique has had fits before, and she's always managed to pull through them in time." "But I guess imminent danger in the form of aliens isn't always part of the issue?" Hera asked. Matthias allowed a short chuckle before speaking again. "Not always, no," he said. "It might not seem that way, but Angelique is very good at keeping her mind clear of outside influences, Xenos or otherwise." His mirth faded. "At any rate, Bianca will be on hand in case things go back to the warp." "My offer of magical healing is still on the table," Tara said. "A few memory spells might be enough to draw Angelique back to reality for a while." "Memory spells?" Matthias asked. "I cannot say I am familiar with that school of psychic powers beyond mind wipes." "We're not talking about mind wipes." Tara's face grew stern. "Mind wipes are completely unethical in almost every school of magic I've studied, and I've studied them all at some point or another. To forcibly alter someone's mind, break a part of their soul to better suit your own ends." She shuddered. "It creeps me out to even think about that, but anyway, memories. A recollection cantrip might be just the thing we need. The caster uses their own memories of the recipient to remind them of who they are and where they came from, thus breaking through any delusions or deceptions that might have been inflicted on them." "I see," Matthias said. He did not, but perhaps Tara would reveal a little more information about where she learned such powers. "I suppose the only problem would be that, since memory is partially based within the soul, there's always the possibility of me seeing something Angelique really doesn't want me to see, and vice versa." Tara paused for a moment. "Though I suppose given how she normally processes information, I'm not sure what she'd show me." "Fascinating," Matthias said. "Still, there seems to be a lot of unknowns involved. Perhaps under better circumstances we can test this theory." "Oh, I've done this before. There's no real danger." Tara paused again. "Though, I can see your point. Maybe I can speak to the Empress and she can help set something up so the Tyranids don't interfere." Maybe Matthias looked away. "I suppose you know the Empress has asked you to stay here for the transit to Nocturne." "No, I didn't. Why?" "She said something about practicing with longer-range communications." Matthias shrugged. "Something like the communication between astropaths and similar psychers, I imagine." "Oh, I can do that." Tara beamed as she continued. And it would certainly help in the event we get separated like on Caesarea. You're welcome to watch in case you want to know a little more about how psychic powers like that work, and we can always ask the Empress about the recollection cantrip then. Perhaps the two walked in silence again, Matthias mulling over the discussion they had and the battle ahead. The Tyranids would be unrelenting, as always, and perhaps Terra's magic might give them some advantage, fleeting as it would be given the hive mind's usual effect on psychers. Maybe she could help Angelique, and then perhaps the young psycher could have a future without constant bombardment from visions, but it was still too much of a risk. Out of the corner of his eye, Matthias could have sworn he saw the shape of a clown mask leering out from the dark. Chapter 2.02 Training. Rebecca watched in silence as Sister Bianca adjusted the dampeners currently clamped to Angelique's head. The contraption looked like a standard guardsman's helmet with extra wires and tubing attached, nothing truly spectacular, yet the low hum it gave off was enough to send a chill down the sister's spine. Angelique winced slightly in her sleep as Bianca completed the procedure, but other than a few inaudible mumbles she did not react further. Her mental stimuli appears to have gone down, Bianca said, stepping away from the psycher. It should be enough to get her off the dampeners in a few days. That is good, isn't it? Rebecca asked, rising to stand next to Bianca as she finished her inspection. For a while, yes. Bianca looked to Rebecca. Lord Matthias will most likely look for a means of keeping Angelique as far from the fighting as possible, so the Tyranid hive mind does not damage her further. Whether it means going back into the dampener or being temporarily stationed on a different ship, that is up to him. Perhaps staying close to the Empress will help. Rebecca offered. Did you not tell me Angelique is at her calmest when within her presence? Yes, but far be it for me to ask the Empress to babysit one psyker while the Tyranids come crashing down on us. Bianca gently stroked Angelique's hand, the psyker quivering from the cool of the Hospitaler's armor. So much trauma in such a young mind. Yes, Rebecca said, looking down at Angelique. From here, the young woman appeared peaceful, curled up in bed with her hands clasped before her. But within her mind, where the lashings of the warp were a constant threat, who knew what awaited? Would you like me to make some tea? While we wait for any response from Angelique? Rebecca asked. That would be welcome, thank you. Bianca smiled, taking a seat next to Angelique while Rebecca crossed to a small kitchenette the Hospitaler had requested be set up, fishing a few leaves from her pocket as she moved to gather water. You know, my greatest fear in the battle to come is not for Angelique, Bianca said, not looking up as Rebecca went about preparing tea. It's for Terra, isn't it? Rebecca asked. Bianca gave a nod as Rebecca continued. She is a strong, lucid psyker, and is mentored by the Empress herself. I do not think there is too much to fear for. I have been around enough psychers during my lifetime. Some were powerful, some were not, all had been properly sanctioned by the Inquisition before the Golden Throne. Bianca looked up to Rebecca. Of the ones that faced Cetus, none were left unscarred. The hive mind is a power that rivals the Empress, blasphemous as it is for me to say, and the unprepared mind is like a speck of wood before a flamer when facing those monsters. Rebecca gave a small swallow, turning her attention back to the tea. I don't usually join Matthias on his field missions into active combat zones. Violence has not been my calling since I took the Hospitaler oath. Bianca looked back down at Angelique. But for Terra's sake, I must be there in case Cetus' presence is too great for her, even with the Empress training. I see. The tea would take a little more time to prepare, so Rebecca turned back to Bianca before speaking again. You would have more experience in this than I. We have never fought Tyranids before, much less with psychers on our side. Stay with the Empress long enough, you'll get more than enough experience. Bianca replied. Ah, but I sound too pessimistic, don't I? Pessimistic is perhaps too harsh. Rebecca shuffled a bit. Your experience is unlike anything I have witnesses, so you are much more learned in these matters than I am. But have faith in Terra's training and abilities, sister, perhaps she will prove to me more resilient than we realize and can turn away the Hive Fleet's attacks. That is in my prayers almost every day, sister. Bianca looked down at Angelique. Even with the Empress within easy reach, it still feels so far away. Rebecca said nothing, turning back to finish preparing the tea. You know, Rebecca started, chewing her lip for a moment before continuing. You know, you can always ask the Empress directly if your concerns become too great. I know that, Bianca said. But standing in her presence is daunting? Rebecca finished, to which Bianca gave a nod. I remember when she called me to speak with her while she was building Terra's armor and sword. I trembled the entire way down, thinking that she was mad at me for some reason. She was concerned, I suppose, for Terra's well-being, asking if she was acclimating to our training and other practices. But she spoke with confidence in Terra, and in us. Rebecca smiled. She understood what we were trying to achieve, and from the way she spoke I knew she believed we would be successful. She took a sip of tea before continuing. To approach the Empress is like approaching one's mother, a journey filled with trepidation, but the outcome is far more rewarding than your initial fears make it out to be. The Sisters Superior of the Argent Shroud could be quite harsh in discipline. Bianca replied. Though standing before the Empress does feel much the same, and yet she has never tried to strike me. See? She is already much more approachable than you realize. Rebecca smiled. Speak with her about Terra's training, and set your fears at ease. I promise you, all will become much clearer before here. There was a pause before she giggled. That sounds like something Ruth would say. Your sister is strong in her faith, so perhaps that is not all bad. Bianca replied with a chuckle of her own. Thank you for your words, Rebecca. I suppose I allowed myself to slip a little too far. Rebecca nodded. Empowering those that were lost, even if only a few steps from the path, what better way to keep the ways of the Order strong? As they watched Angelique, quietly drinking their tea, Rebecca felt at peace. Twilight took a breath as she slid back, bringing her sword up to deflect Naomi's incoming strike. Her read-through of Sigismund's treatises on swordplay was paying off, her blade flashing forward to catch Naomi's chainsword time and again. The Sister Superior still had her on the defensive, but Twilight could recover from there. Much better, Naomi said, twisting her chainsword around to parry Twilight's lunge. Your motions are fluid and do not expose your weaknesses. Speed could be better, though. I'm still learning. Twilight replied, taking her sword in both hands before raising it to stop a downward strike. And I'm not using my magic. The Empress has been showing me a few spells that help speed up perception and reactions. Has she? Naomi broke away, bringing her chainsword to a guard position. Then I suppose now is as good a time as any to see what you can do. Girls. The other four sisters broke off from their own training regimens, lining up next to the sparring arena. Terra is going to demonstrate that which she has learned from the Empress. Watch closely, so we may fully understand what we face should a similar enemy face us. Are you sure about this? Twilight asked. I mean, I'm still rather new to this, and I don't want either of us to get hurt. It will be fine, Terra, Naomi said. Timidness is unbecoming of our order, and the benefits of such training far outweigh any risk. Now, show us your power. Twilight gulped but gave a short nod, bringing her sword low for an upward strike. She furrowed her brow as she reached through the Imperium, her soul weaving through the warp energy until she found the right input. Naomi took a swing towards Twilight, only now it came much slower. Twilight stepped to the side, bringing her sword up to gently tap the oncoming chainsword away before time returned to normal. Whipping the sword around, Twilight stopped the blade mere inches from Naomi's throat, the sister eyeing the sword with a mix of wariness and admiration. What was that? Judith asked, her eyes wide. You started shimmering and then all of a sudden you were at Sister Naomi's throat. It's a time dilation spell, Twilight replied, bringing her sword down and stepping away from Naomi. The Empress said that it slows down the flow of time in a general area, allowing me or my friends to step out of oncoming danger and respond before the other can react. There was a pause before she gave a sheepish grin. I haven't really gotten the group part mastered yet. But we saw it as you going faster, Judith said, furrowing her brow. Wouldn't that mean you sped up time around you rather than slowing it down? From your perspective, maybe, but speeding up time is a bit more intensive and would probably look like I turned intangible completely rather than just shimmering like I did. Oh, Judith nodded before speaking again. That doesn't make sense, Terra. Trying to comprehend sorcery in general does not make sense. Ruth added, giving a small shudder. Holy or not, it still feels wrong. I will admit it is a bit unsettling, but as a student of the Empress she has great control over it, Naomi said, looking to Twilight. The way you moved it was beyond even Astartes in combat. I just couldn't fully comprehend what I had seen until it was over. She paused before giving Twilight a reassuring smile. I am sure we will all appreciate a proper use of your powers when the time comes. Thank you. Twilight returned the smile before continuing. I'd like to demonstrate more, but I have a training session with the Empress soon and I don't want to keep her waiting. Of course, of course. Naomi nodded. We will continue training until you need us again. The other four nodded in affirmation. Twilight sometimes worried perhaps they trained too much, but now was not the time to critique training schedules. She turned and made her way towards the exit, hitching her sword back to its mag clamp before stepping out into the hallway. It was more cramped than the sweeping hallways of the Empress flagship, but to Twilight it was as if she were coming back to an old friend once again, familiarity washing away all other uncertainties. A pang of guilt briefly flared in her mind, but that could be addressed later. She stepped into her room, unhitching her sword and setting it gently on her bed so she could sit properly. That task complete, she knelt in the center of the room, closing her eyes and slowing her breath to relax. Gradually, she began to reach out with her power, her magic brushing against the minds of her fellows aboard the Sanguinium Martyrs as she delved deeper into the warp. Hello, Twilight. Twilight opens her eyes to find herself seated on a flat plane, motes of light flickering around her as her senses sharpen. Across from her is Celestia, the other woman seated cross-legged in her dress uniform. I have not interrupted anything, have I? Of course not, Princess. Twilight says, giving her teacher a smile. The sisters are becoming much more understanding of my power since we've been training together. Good, good. Celestia says. It is good to see that at least some superstitions can be overcome. Given what you've told me of some of the powers around here, they have every right to be afraid. Twilight counters. Not all superstition is unfounded, at least here, it's not. Perhaps there is a pause before Celestia smiles. But we are getting sidetracked, are we not? Let's continue with your studies. Yes, of course. Twilight smiles eagerly. What do you have planned today? I showed the sisters that time dilation spell you taught me, and they seemed impressed or worried, I'm not really sure which. In their case, it would be fair to say a mixture of both, would it not? Celestia asks. We will go back over offense later. For now, I would like to extend your defenses. The Tyranids possess many potent psychic weapons and beasts, and I want you to be prepared to deflect their assaults by whatever means possible. Okay. Twilight shuffles into a seated position, the construct of her armor dissipating to be replaced by violet robes. I am ready. Think not of the warp as flowing energy in this moment. Celestia says, closing her eyes as she reaches out through the warp. Draw upon it until it forms a bastion within your soul, but only just so it does not overwhelm you. Feel the contortion of the Imperium around you, press back against the waves with will and understanding. Your enemies will impart lies and deceptions upon your mind, reject them, and you will turn back their spells. So, kind of like forming a shield in the real world, only it's entirely mental. Twilight says. A simplified thought, but yes. Celestia allows a small smirk to cross her lips. I am surprised that you did not know this already. Different universal magic theory, and the Imperium doesn't really have a whole lot on the specific mechanics of psychic powers. Twilight closes her eyes as well, pulling the warp closer as she tries to construct the mental bastion. She hears the whispers of thoughts from others again, but a quick shift is enough to keep them from drifting too far into her mind and breaking her focus. For what feels like an eternity yet is only a matter of seconds she waits, her soul projecting forth in preparation for what lays ahead. She feels a pressure against her mind, slowly building in power the longer she holds. Twilight shifts her focus, the mental shield drifting to counter the pressure as she searches for. Briefly it dissipates, but it resurges just as Twilight relaxes, the shield barely holding as a tide of images and sounds floods through the Imperium. She sees the battlefields of Caesarea, strewn with the blood of men and orcs. Young soldiers stand resolute, faltering only as the jagged and rusty blades of aliens cleave arms and heads apart. She sees her allies, fighting for survival against impossible odds. Matthias, the sisters, Angelique, all cast their might against the void. One by one they are torn asunder, their bodies spiraling off into nothingness as Twilight reaches for them. Some parts she holds on to, only for them to crumble to dust as dying screams echo through her mind. She sees her friends in Ponyville, lost within the void as it closes around her. She tries to reach for them, but the shield slips and the weight of the warp comes crashing down, killing the cry in her throat. Where are you, Twilight? The voice of Spike calls. We are lost, Rarity adds. Why have you gone away? You left us, Rainbow Dash cries. You left us all alone, defenseless. One last image remains. 7 pikes for 7 heads, all staring blankly into the void as a red sun burns away flesh. No. Twilight screams, her power surging forward against the images. Each shatters like glass, pain racing through Twilight's mind as she lashes out. Her friends, gone, her allies, slaughtered. What else would remain? What did she have? These are just images. Nothing is real. Twilight opens her eyes. She is back in the original field, the motes of light floating past. Celestia sits across from her, her face marked with sorrow. That was a low blow, and I am sorry for what I showed you. Celestia says, raising her head so she can meet Twilight's gaze. My dreams have been racked with such visions for many years, Twilight. I am sorry that you had to witness such things, but I only wish to prepare you for the challenges you may face. Those twilight starts. Those were your dreams? Many warp entities will attempt to inflict horrific visions upon their victims, to break their will and leave their minds open for attack. Celestia says. Though not a demon, the hive mind acts in much the same way. You need only look to your friend Angelique for an example of what the Tyranids can do to the unexpecting mind. Twilight looks away. Fears, doubts, all were weapons for her enemies to exploit, to twist her mind into something weak exposed. Strike. Harry. The memory of my friends, Twilight says, looking back up at Celestia. I know my friends are safe in Ponyville. It's been, I don't want to think about how long it's been, but they are safe. Those visions were lies, all of them, trying to make me and you break in the face of danger. Twilight gives Celestia a smile. But we have our own strength, and we have each other. That is more than enough for us to stand against the tide. There are others among you that lend you their strength, Twilight. Celestia replies. Do not forget them, and they too will help in your battle against the enemies of mankind and Ponykind as well. Yes, Twilight pauses, chewing her lip for several moments. I feel like I'm forgetting that at times. I feel like every day I say here makes Ponyville fade further and further. Memory is part of the soul, Twilight. Fade they will never go out, for the bonds of your friendship burn brighter than any flame or light I could conjure to replace them. Celestia closes her eyes as images of Equestria swirl around them. Twilight sees her memories, of racing with Applejack and Rainbow Dash through Whitetail Wood, celebrating the birth of the Cake Twins, helping Cadence prepare for the Crystal Empire's entry into the Equestria Games. She smiles, beaming as the images swirl around her to a final picture of her and her friends, all happy just to be together in peace. The work we do here is important, but Equestria is your home, Celestia says as the images fade away. Hold to this, keep those memories close, and no power of the warp, no entity of terrible power, will be able to dominate you. Twilight sits in silence for several moments, allowing old memories to wash over her again and again. She sighs, allowing her mind to calm before she looks back to her mentor. Thank you, Princess, she says. I will never forget this, and I will never forget them. My friends in Equestria, or the friends I have made here, all of them give me the strength to stand against attacks and lies. She smiles again. Thank you. You are very welcome, Twilight. Celestia replies. Now, let's try the shield again. I promise not to be so rough until you are ready. Chapter 2.03 The Halls of Prometheus. Celestia took a breath as she meditated, clearing her mind as she focused on the warp. Ahead she could feel the presence of Nocturne, and beyond that the fortress moon of Prometheus the salamanders used to shield their charges. Beyond, she could feel the numbness brought upon by the hive mind, the faint cries of a billion chittering monsters echoing in the furthest reaches of her perception. Neither seemed to be intersecting yet. Celestia took another breath, dismissing the path of inquiry as she turned her attention back to her fleet. She could feel the growing light that was Twilight, flickering in and out as they continued their transit through the warp. With her power growing as it was only a matter of time before the other denizens of the warp took notice, or she attempted to take matters into her own hands and overstretched herself. Celestia knew Twilight could handle the latter, but the former. I still have time to train her. She thought. She will be fine. The others were slightly less bright among the tides of the Imperium, such that Celestia had to focus further to pick out individuals. The sororitas that had attached themselves to Twilight were calm lights among the void, their faith and prayers a surprising bulwark against the Imperium. The Inquisitor and his henchmen were much the same, perhaps more weary from their own encounters against the Tyranids. All were strong points from which Twilight could draw upon. All she needed was to remember how best to do that. Empress, Celestia recalled her soul as one of her companions stepped into her room. We are preparing for the return to real space. Good. Celestia rose, straightening out her armor before continuing. Have all personnel report to their stations. I have glimpsed through the warp and have not found sign of battle, but we must be prepared nonetheless. Yes, Empress. Her companion departed, Celestia following soon after. She could feel the mechanics of the battleship working as they prepared for re-entry, the ship humming with every step she took. Soldiers and crewmen ducked past her, Celestia keeping her attention forward so they would not feel the need to genuflect before her. Eventually she reached the bridge, just as the navigators called out in preparation. Destination point reached. Exiting warp space in 3, 2, 1. Outside, space contorted as a glowing warp rift opened, spitting the battleship and select escorts out before winking out of existence. Soon other craft joined it, The Sanguinium Martyrs breaking through first, followed soon by preliminary Dark Angel attack cruisers. Celestia would give the fleet a few more minutes to form up, then they could proceed. Before the fleet lay the planet of Nocturne, partially eclipsed by its moon Prometheus. The planet's surface shimmered with volcanic activity, flashes of red and yellow breaking through thick clouds of ash like fireworks in a night sky. Around the moon she could see another fleet of ships, some bearing the green and black of the salamanders while others bore the insignias of many other chapters of Astartes, some familiar while others eluded her memory. The fleet barely reacted as the Crusade Armada pulled out of warp space, continuing their vigil around Prometheus as the newcomers pulled closer. Empress, one of the bridge officers said. We are receiving a communication from the leading battle barge. Open comms, she replied. I will hear what my sons have to say. There was a pause before the message came through, a brief bout of static filling the bridge before a voice spoke. By the marks on your ships you are of the fleet under the Empress of mankind. The voice said. You speak to the Empress herself, Celestia replied. We come seeking war against the hive mind, not Prometheus. We gathered, it is a dark day when the greatest of mankind come hunting for the lowliest. The voice replied. I am Vulcan Mirtian, Forgefather of the Salamanders. It is an honor to have one as illustrious as yourself in our presence, though I believe you may have been misdirected. The honor is all mine, Mirtian. Celestia replied. Though, misdirected? How so? There are no Tyranids here, at least not as far as I know. The Forgefather gave a short sigh. We were preparing to travel to Rin's world, where the jaws of Cetus close in around our brothers in arms. But with your arrival, perhaps the plight of the southern Imperium may be cleansed. Celestia massaged her chin with her hand. Perhaps Matthias Psyker had been wrong in her prophecy, but then she was not explicit in Prometheus being attacked directly. While time is of the essence, she said. I would like to speak with you before departure, so I may get a better understanding of the situation that awaits us on Rin's world. Of course. Mirtian replied. Your ships will no doubt need time to refuel and resupply for the mission ahead. I will alert Chapter Master Gerarth of your arrival. Of course, Celestia said. I look forward to speaking with you in person. With that the message closed out, Celestia shifting on her feet for a moment before speaking again. Put me through to the rock, I will speak to the lion. Yes, my Empress. There was another pause as the connection reached the rock, Celestia mulling over her next actions before the comms crackled again. Empress. The lion's voice echoed through the bridge. Johnson. Celestia replied. We will be convening with the salamanders on Prometheus. The tactical situation has changed and I would like us all to be of the same understanding. The Tyranids attacked the sons of Dorn rather than those of Vulcan, Johnson said. I figured as much with how the tides of the warp are being reported. If we are to attack, may I suggest a two-wave assault to ensure the creatures are properly engaged? I will consider it. Even with our forces here we need to be prepared for what tricks the Tyranids may have prepared for us. Once we have consulted with the Salamanders, Corax, and others who have battled the hive mind, we can draw together our strategy for the coming war. Of course. One did not have to be Empress to detect the disappointment in the lion's voice. I will meet you on Prometheus, then. I am sure we will have much to discuss, Celestia said as the calm closed out. She cast another glance towards Nocturne, watching as the lava fields flared once more through the haze. It has been too long since I have visited this world. She thought, her mind drifting back to the fields of fire where she had met Vulcan millennia ago. If only it were under better circumstances. Nevertheless, we must be prepared. I shall not fail the Imperium again. Corax waited in silence as he and the Empress descended towards Prometheus. She had not said much, but the Primarch was more than capable of figuring out what was on her mind, planning for the next stage of the campaign, searching for a means by which she would not sacrifice her army to only slow the Tyranids down. Corax had seen lesser men driven to madness in an attempt to solve that issue. Perhaps the Empress would fare better. The lander jostled as they reached the ground, though Corax and the others aboard barely moving. The Empress was the first to approach the exit, waiting patiently while the ship made full contact before opening to Prometheus. Corax made his way through the Empress entourage of Custodes, stopping by her side just as the door opened. You never set foot on Prometheus during the Crusade, did you? The Empress asked as they left the ship. I did visit several millennia after the heresy, during my search for absolution, Corax said as he looked around. I cannot say that much has changed since then. Prometheus was, perhaps, a bit more hospitable than Nocturne itself, but only because the volcanic activity of the moon was slightly less than that of its mother planet. Even within the spaceport the salamanders had constructed there seemed to drift a thin haze of ash, swirling about Astartes and men like darkened ghosts. Out of the shadows Corax could see Terra followed closely by the Inquisitor, his henchmen, and the sororitas, Terra waving her hand in her face to break up the ash cloud as best she could. Not exactly a hospitable place, she said once she reached them, but then everywhere else we've visited hasn't been much better. Perhaps the Tyranids might invade a paradise world during our travels. One of the Valhallans said, earning a jab from the other. Atmospherically it may be harsh, but the residents of Prometheus are not known for turning away guests. The Empress said. Now be on alert, our hosts have arrived. Corax shifted his gaze again, spotting a trio of green-clad Astartes approaching for a different hangar. The leader of the group was cloaked in a fine drakescale cape, his helmet tucked under one arm to reveal his face to the group. Like all of the sons of Vulcan, his skin was as black as Corax's armor, his eyes like smoldering embers, but like Corax's missing brother carried an air of friendliness about him that far offset all other features. The salamanders stopped before the Empress, the leader giving a respectful bow before speaking. Welcome to Prometheus, Empress, he said. I am Mershan. Well met, the Empress returned the bow before continuing. Lord Corax of the Raven Guard should be known to you, and this is my personal student, Terra. The Forgefather regarded Terra for a moment, stepping away from the Empress before speaking to the young woman. I have not heard much of the Empress student, he said, pausing before smiling and offering his free hand. But I look forward to serving alongside you nonetheless. Terra hesitated, more out of surprise at the gesture of Mershan offering a hand to shake, but she soon broke out of her surprise and returned the gesture. If we are finished with pleasantries, Johnson said as he and his followers came up behind Terra. We have a campaign to plan. Terra seemed to withdraw towards the shadows with the lion's arrival, but she did appear to be keeping a calm face before the Astartes and Primarchs in her midst. Of course, Mershan said, seemingly taking on similar reservations as Terra. Please, this way. The Empress took point, following the Forgefather as he and the salamanders led them further into the base. Johnson, unaccustomed to normal pleasantries as he was, pushed on ahead to stay close to the Empress, while Corax, Terra, and the others followed behind. The young psyker seemed content to speak with her fellows, so Corax allowed his attention to drift as he listened into the various conversations. You have caught us in a most difficult time, Empress, he heard Mershan say. The time of trials has struck Nocturne, and with so many of our brothers assisting the battle against Cetus we find ourselves lacking in forces to send to your aid. In time, the Empress replied. You have your families and world to worry about, after all. But when the trials have passed and Cetus lies broken, I look forward to battling alongside all of the sons of Nocturne. We welcome the honor, Empress. I see that the sons of Vulcan have not changed their demeanor. The lion said, slowing his pace so he could speak with Corax. In this time of uncertainty, that we can find welcoming allies at all bodes well for our mission. Corax replied. That you are even speaking to me must be a side effect. Johnson gave a scoff. You have changed, Corax, else you would not be speaking so highly of welcome tidings over clinging to the shadows. I change as needed, Johnson. Corax cast a short glance over his shoulder, spotting Terra chucking at something the shorter sororitas said. My absolution may still elude me, but there is a time and place for clinging to old reservations. Do not tell me you were won over by the student, were you? Corax furrowed his brow as he looked to the lion. Student of the Empress she may be, she is a child grasping at things she cannot begin to comprehend. She is a liability to the Empress and the Crusade if she is kept coddled like this. Do not underestimate Terra. Corax countered. There is potential within her that even the Empress does not see. To keep her away for fear of her relative inexperience is to stifle that potential before it has the ability to mature. I do not fear inexperience on the battlefield. If I did, our numbers would be far depleted for want of experienced troops. The lion kept his focus ahead, though Corax could see the frustration on the other Primarch's face. It is here inexperience off the battlefield that is so dangerous. She knows nothing of war, of what we were created for, and her attempts at understanding are beyond naive. She will only slow us down until her blundering leads to deaths beyond imaginable. Perhaps if your critiques take on airs other than quiet contempt, we would not reach such a point. Corax muttered, just enough that the lion did not hear him. Johnson was long on trust and short on respect, Corax knew, but there came a point when stubbornness eclipsed normal caution. Perhaps the lion just needed to be reminded of what that point was. Corax had fallen silent for the remainder of the trip, letting his observations broaden again. They had been led towards a larger building, Great doors overshadows by a carving of two drakes rising towards each other, Corax noting that the one on the right was slightly larger than the others. Vulcan had spoken at length of the challenge that led to his service for the Emperor, so seeing some remembrance of Corax's old friend was welcoming? Pleasant? A reminder of what was lost due to arrogance and stupidity? Given the Empress' brief hesitation as she crossed the threshold, most likely the latter. Gerarth is not here, unfortunately, Meerschaum explained as he and other salamanders led them further into the citadel. He is on Nocturne making sure the preparations for the time of trials have been properly carried out. I have been asked to speak in his stead, though the salamander gave a sheepish grin. I am not much for grand speeches and master planning like he is. All of us have the opportunity for greatness, though, the Empress countered. Perhaps not in the ways we see it, but even the shadows of giants have edges. Meerschaum seemed to accept that, giving another smile as they came to a stop in a larger atrium. 7 great seats had been arranged in a circle, centered in a large map of the galaxy. The Empress and the Lion stepped towards the display, with Corax and Meerschaum following behind. They were no strangers to campaign planning, but despite her claims the shadow of the Empress was not one to easily get out of in these matters. This map is up to date? The Empress looked to Meerschaum. As of the last report we received from Rin's world, yes. The Forgefather replied. 2 companies of my brothers are there along with the Crimson Fists and other chapters, as well as supporting Imperial Guard regiments, and they try to keep our communication lines as open as possible. The feat must be impressive. The Lion said, zooming the map closer to the planet in question. I have studied these creatures since my awakening. They project a psychic null field that blocks all warp travel, be it by ship or telepathic communication. Since they appear to be trying to envelop Rin's world in its entirety, that field must be particularly strong. All fortresses have weak points. Meerschaum countered. We were just lucky enough to find a few gaps within the shadow we could use to break through. Gaps, Corax mused. Intentionally set or not? That will be our point of entry, then. The Empress said. The only way Rin's world and the rest of the Southern Imperium is to survive is if we find a way to break through that field reliably. I could smash my way through with a bit of focus, but there is always the risk of the hive mind pressing back in such a way they trap us there. We'll need a suitable beachhead. Johnson examined the map a bit closer. If enough of their more potent psychic nodes are disabled, you can stabilize the rifts long enough for adequate reinforcements to arrive. And I suppose you would be the one leading the charge? Corax asked, perhaps a bit too curtly than he intended. The Lion did not seem to notice. If the Empress is to hold the Hive fleet at bay, she cannot do both that and command armies in the field at the same time. We have the resources where the 3 of us can strike the Tyranids from multiple points in a number of ways. The Xenos will be hard-pressed to adapt to all threats coming against them. With all due respect, my lord, Meerschaum said. The Tyranids are equally known for their adaptability, and Cetus is no exception. Whatever advantage a change in tactics may have will not last long before they can counter us. Then we shall have to strike swiftly, won't we? The Lion countered. Meerschaum did not seem to have a reply to that, instead giving a half-hearted nod before turning his attention back to the map. If you are seeking to attack the Hive nodes, our reconnaissance flights have told us the main command centers are situated on the second continent Magellan. Meerschaum shifted the map so a display of Rin's world's geography appeared. Most of the fighting has shifted to the primary continent Sirocco, which brings us to the matter of civilians. There are still nearly 30 million non-combatants on the planet, most within the planetary capital of New Rin City. We have done our best to evacuate the populace from the path of the Hive fleet, but we are running out of places to move them before they are swept away as well. We will not have to worry long about shunting non-combatants from one city to another. The Lion muttered. If this plan is successful, Rin's world will be back in our hands with little trouble, then we can address the civilian question. Do not be so dismissive, Johnson. The Empress said. These are my subjects we are discussing, after all. She looked back to the map. If conditions are right, we can see about evacuating as many as we can until the Tyranids are defeated. The fleet will provide adequate protection for them. The Rinites and the Crimson Fists will be forever in your debt, no doubt. Meerschaum said. We have already taken on a number of refugees here, but with Cetus attacks and our own trials it has proven difficult. No matter the costs, we shall do all we can to save Rin's world and her people. The Empress looked to Meerschaum. You have my word as Empress that this will be carried out. You shall not find us wanting, Empress. On the matter at hand, the Lion said. Corax can take a force to move to the civilian locations and perhaps relieve the Crimson Fists at their fortress, if it still stands upon our arrival. I will take my sons to attack the Tyranids on Magellan to break their psychic shroud, and then the Empress can bring the main force to crush the Xenos completely. A two-wave assault might mean delays if we are required to bring our full force to bear. The Empress mused. But then a forceful attack might knock the aliens off balance long enough for a killing strike. There was a pause before she spoke again. Yes, we will try this. I will need all the focus I can get to make sure the fleet actually gets through the shadow in the first place. What about the civilians? Korax and the others turned to see Terra stepping up. Moving 30 million people to safety in the middle of a war zone will cause so many logistical problems that might cause plenty of deaths without there being enemies to worry about. The Empress' words were that evacuation was tentative on the conditions being favorable. Student Johnson responded, furrowing his brow. We cannot divert resources just to guard civilians without losing the rest of the planet. Of course. Terra shot back. But when conditions are favorable? Do you have a plan for that, or would it just boil down to kill more Tyranids? Favorable as that would be, Terra does have a point. Korax offered. All the battle plans and glorious victories won't mean much if there's nothing left of Rin's world to show for it. Agreed. The Empress said, giving a nod. Terra, draw up a plan to organize the civilian population for evacuation of Rin's world should the need and opportunity arise. Take as much time as you need. The journey to Rin's world is a long one, but I am sure you will come up with a most satisfactory plan. If the Empress noticed Johnson's scoff, she did not make mention of it. I'll do my best, Terra said, beaming. I promise you I won't let you down. And at the very least it will keep the Lion's criticisms to a minimum, Korax thought. Organization would be a simple task, and Korax had seen Terra's preliminary work on Caesarea before everything went to the warp. She would be a perfect choice to make sure civilians were kept away from rampaging hordes of Tyranids and the soldiers intent on killing them. As the discussion continued, Korax spotted movement among the shadows of the citadel. It was a slight movement, a flicker followed by prolonged stillness, but Korax was no fool not to recognize what he had seen. Somehow, even with the hive mind bearing down upon the Imperium, Lorger was watching them. Celestia and the Primarchs had more planning to do, and Matthias had left to gather some supplies he had ordered prior to leaving Caesarea. That left Twilight alone to explore the spaceport of Prometheus for a day or so, and perhaps begin some drafts of her plan to evacuate Rin's world. Twilight stifled a yawn as she fanned through another report on Sirocco's food distribution. Several hours of hard studying on Rin's world had given her a better perspective on the besieged agri-world, but there was still so much more she had to learn before any plan could be implemented, making sure there were still healthy civilians to evacuate being high on her list of priorities. That she did not get the best night of sleep before their arrival on Prometheus did not exactly help matters either. Come on, Twilight, she thought as she opened the report again. You've pulled dozens of all-nighters before you can get through this one with no problem. Her confidence renewed. She grabbed a nearby pen and continued jotting down her notes, humming some song Pinky had taught her to keep herself focused. She continued for several minutes before there was a knock at the door. Who is it? Lord Meerschaum would like to speak with you, Terra, Veronica called through the door. Are you able to speak with him? Oh, of course. Twilight set her work aside and rose to face the door. Please let him in. There was a pause before Veronica pushed open the door, the Forgefather stepping in shortly after. The Space Marine still seemed as friendly as ever, despite his rather frightening visage, and Twilight could not help but let a smile form on her face. Good morning, Miss Terra, Meerschaum said as Veronica closed the door behind him. I hope I did not disturb you. Of course not. Twilight replied. I was just trying to get my information together before we head out. I know Rin's world is something like 4 months away. 6 months. Meerschaum corrected. Right, but the point is I want to have all my information together before we get there, so if the Empress wants to implement my plan, it'll only take a day or two of explanation instead of a week of coordination. I see. Meerschaum crossed to Twilight's table, picking up some of her notes and giving them a quick scan through. Interesting script. Where did you learn this? Twilight blinked in surprise before realizing that most of her notes were scratched out in Equestrian. Oh dear. Oh, that? She said, giving a nervous chuckle. That's just my homeworld's dialect. It's very obscure and hard to learn. Interesting. The Forgefather flipped through her notes again. What is the name of this planet? Perhaps one of my brothers has visited and knows the language. Probably not, Twilight mumbled, drawing a confused glance from Meerschaum. Oh, I mean the planet's called Equus 3. Yes, that's how it translates into Gothic. Equus 3. Meerschaum looked back to Twilight's notes. Unusual name. It draws from the Old Gothic term for horse, does it not? The Forgefather turned back and regarded Twilight for a moment. Most likely founded by former soldiers, then. You appear to have some mix of Cadian and Mortian stock in your blood, so the possibility is not unlikely. Oh, right. Twilight fidgeted. Meerschaum was merely being friendly, she knew, but any more probing questions might lead to her slipping up about Equestria and Celestia's true identity. The salamander might not react too poorly to the revelation, but then when did anything meet expectations with this place? Regardless, I'm sure your plan is a fine one, and I look forward to seeing it implemented. Meerschaum set Twilight's notes down and turned to face her. That is partially why I sought you out, to thank you. Really? Twilight asked, one eyebrow raised. Too many Astartes and men of power seem to neglect what we are truly fighting for, the continued survival of mankind. Meerschaum gave a small sigh. Some of my colleagues would think that killing Xenos and heretics is the most reliable option, but at what cost? Should we destroy mankind along with our enemies? Of course not, Twilight said. We just seem to rush from battle to battle without really considering what we leave behind. I think that's why Lord Johnson doesn't like me all that much. I'm not doing things on his schedule. The Dark Angels have always been a proud and aggressive chapter, Meerschaum offered. Their Primarch appears to be no exception. Do not fault him if he comes off as too harsh, for that is what he is most used to in these times of trouble. At the very least we should be thankful that Lord Corax and the Empress are present to provide some alternative to the Dark Angels' approach. I suppose. Twilight looked back at her notes. I guess I'm just not that used to such harsh criticisms like that. A few arguments and some debate, maybe, but total rejection? Give it time, and perhaps Lord Johnson will be more open to your ideas. Meerschaum said, offering Twilight a friendly smile. Twilight quickly found herself returning the gesture as Meerschaum continued. It is good to see that the Empress has chosen such a kind soul to be her student. Oh, thank you. Twilight brushed a lock of hair behind her ear. It's been a while since anyone said that to me. Most just call me naive. The sons of Vulcan are no strangers to such criticisms. One of our former chapter masters, Tushan, nearly killed another Astartes commander who bombarded a civilian encampment during the Third War for Armageddon and passed it off as nothing. Twilight allowed a small gasp of shock. Compassion is a dwindling resource in the Imperium, Terra. Cherish the gift you have been given, for it gives you a strength that not even the foulest monsters of the warp can overcome, even if your allies do not always understand it. Twilight found herself chewing her lip. Such words of encouragement were hard to come by in this universe, even from Celestia at times. Now that she was hearing it from a space marine, Twilight felt at a loss. Thank you, Meerschaum, she said finally. It's been difficult, trying to stay optimistic with everything going on around me. I'll be sure to take your words to heart. It will be a dark day for the Imperium when you don't. Meerschaum replied. Now, I have other duties to attend to. Perhaps before we march for Rin's world, we can talk again about your plan. Oh, I'd love to, Twilight cried before she realized she was still in a somewhat formal setting. I mean, I would be honored to discuss it with you, if the Empress does find the plan to her liking. Of course. By your leave. And with that Meerschaum was gone, slipping through the door as Sister Veronica opened it for the Astartes. She paused for a moment before looking in at Twilight. Did everything go well with the Forge Father? She asked. Oh yes, Twilight said, still beaming. Everything went far better than I could have imagined. End of chapter 2.03 The Halls of Prometheus.